I welcome everyone to our panel. That the name of the panel, and I lost it. It is quite long, but it's very important to find it. It disappeared from my screen somehow. Well, multilingual Jewish popular culture from the end of the 19th century until 1939, roots to modernity. My name is Gennady. I teach at New York University, and my function is just a ritual. I am the moderator, the chair, and I'll just be in charge of the timing. The timing is tight. We have just an hour and a half, and of course, we want to listen to the presentations and to leave some time for questions. Yes. Therefore, I'll introduce very shortly, especially as I believe that nowadays with this Google, you press any name and you get the entire story, the entire bibliography, and so on. And the first presentation today is Ella Bauer, and the title is Hebrew Literature Should Descend to the Streets of the Shoemakers, the Tailors and Washerwomen, and the Cooks. Responses in Warsaw at the end of the 19th century to the development of popular Hebrew literature. Ella, please, yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Gennady. Thank you for Eugenia, who organized this panel. And as we said, I think we all prefer to be sitting in the same room, but it's always nice to be with the two of you. So, so let's start with the presentation. Okay. So among the many young newcomers who arrived in Warsaw at the beginning of the 1890s for the purpose of building a better life was a young Jewish man who in 1891 wrote in his diary, and I quote, "I'm going to a place where I'll be able to develop personal skills and improving my own literary work." Oh, I'm sorry. The newcomer was Avram Leib Shelkovitz, a Hebrew writer and publisher who would soon be known by his pseudonym Ben Avigdor. Warsaw seemed to him to be a place where he could improve his literary work. After all, the city was already known an important Jewish and Polish literary center. 50% of all world Polish newspaper in the second half of the 19th century were published in Warsaw. 47 Polish publishing houses operated throughout the city. On several streets, which were known as the Jewish Street, Yiddish, Jewish booksellers sold and published Asur type of Hebrew books. Soon, they would be joined in their activity by various public Hebrew publishing houses, such as Achi Asaf. In different streets, in the Yiddish guest, the editorial board of Jewish newspapers such as Hatzfira, Israelita, Ha'asif operated. Some of the Jewish and the Polish books and the periodical that were published in Warsaw at the end of the 19th century were aimed at a new type of readership, the common readers. Readers who until the last decade of the 19th century were almost not taken into consideration at all by publisher and other literary agents. The young newcomer, Shelkovitz, was also aware to those new literary patrons. A short time after his arrival to the city, he began to be involved with a new literary project that was affiliated with the common Hebrew readership. Sifrei Agura, penny books, a series of Hebrew plot literature. It was this project that earned him his literary reputation. When Shelkovitz shared his idea about creating a Hebrew series of plot literature with his future brother-in-law, the Yiddish poet Yoash Shlomo Blumenthal, and with several local Jewish publishers, the response were ambivalent. There were those who argue that the Jewish readership was not yet ready for Jewish plot literature, while other Hebrew did not seem to be an appropriate language for literature of this type. This was not only because it was the holy language, but also because it was the Jewish national language. Rather, it was felt Jewish plot literature should be written in a language of the common people, Yiddish. Ben Avigdor very much wanted to create a Jewish national literature that, among other things, would include literary work about the common people and for the common people. He believed that national literature needed to fulfill the spiritual need of the Jewish common people. Because Hebrew literature was a national literature, he felt it should be accessible to different social sectors, including the common people, the shoemaker, the tailor, and the peddlers. Several Polish associations in Warsaw around this time sponsored the low-cost publication of classical Polish literature and translation of classical European literature. Ben Avigdor wanted to publish Hebrew belletristes that would be written in relatively simple, natural language and would be sold for low prices. His attempt to expand the boundaries of modern Hebrew literature challenged the hierarchy that exists between Hebrew literature and language and Yiddish literature and language. In addition, those who believed that it would be wrong to expand the boundaries of Hebrew literature, there were others in Warsaw who believed that it would be wrong to change the popular nature of Yiddish literature. Among the later was Hatzfira columnist Hanetz, Naftali Herz-Nemonovich, who doubted whether there was a point to publish the new Yiddish almanach, the Hoesfreund and the Yiddish Volksbibliothek, since those publications were considered to be high-quality literary work that did not have any value to the Jewish masses. It was not accidental that this discussion emerged at the end of the 19th century, when in many European cities, new social and political force began to be taken into consideration with regard to political, cultural, and public life, namely the masses. As a result of democratization process of culture and political life, the masses become a factor that need to be taken into consideration in the making of political and cultural decisions. Various mass movements were established. Members of different elite groups acknowledged that they should not only take action on behalf of the masses, but that in fact they should act with the masses. In Polish territory, those developments happened at slower pace than in Central and Western Europe. However, as it was the case in Warsaw, those developments had significant impact on the social surrounding, on the urban landscape. In Warsaw, the understanding that the need of the masses should be taken into consideration when making political and economic decisions, such as related to various cultural projects, were accepted relatively warmly by Jewish and non-Jewish authors, social activists, and other members of the intelligentsia. Several articles noted that the elite and the masses needed to have a channel of communication which would guarantee that the member of the elite would be familiar with the cultural baggage of the masses and their lifestyle. However, at the same time, the attempt to create such a channel of communication between members of the Jewish intelligentsia and the masses revealed that there were two distant approaches to this task among members of the elite Jewish circle. The first approach includes patronizing attitude and disrespect. Because of this approach, Yiddish, the language of the masses, was looked upon as a jargon and not as a legitimate language. Popular Jewish literature, including folk literary works and popular songs that were sang during cooking, laundering, and other labor, seemed to be vulgar and lacking of any aesthetic value. What was considered to be lack of civil behaving among the masses was believed to be the factor that prevent progress and modernization among the Jewish social sector. On the other hand, the second approach articulates empathy and respect for the traditional Jewish way of life and the popular Jewish culture. This approach articulated the Hebrew and the Yiddish term Amcha. The term, like the phrases Chad Ha'am, was not just a verbal or literal translation for the term masses and common people or ordinary person who is like any other person. Using the phrase Amcha emphasized the uniqueness of the Jewish masses and the uniqueness of the Jewish common people. Various Hebrew literary projects that were published in Warsaw during the last decade of the 19th century articulated the duality of empathy to the Amcha and the patronizing attitude of some member of the Jewish intelligentsia to the Jewish common people. This can be noticed, for example, in Assad Hebrew self-help medical books that local Jewish doctors and social activists published around that time. Already before the 1890s, there were awareness among Jewish social activists and doctors about the importance of writing medical guidebook in Hebrew. As one of them, a very popular doctor among Jewish patients in Warsaw named Dr. Moshe Shtudotsky explained, and I quote, "Not all Jewish parents could afford to take their children to the doctors. However, they all know how to read either Hebrew or Yiddish. Hence, with medical guidebook, poor Jewish parents could protect the health of their children." End of quote. In the 1890s, Hebrew medical guidebook and other Hebrew popular scientific publication reflected the public and the intellectual zeitgeist that developed in Warsaw at that time. Those books reflected an understanding that developed around that time among members of the intelligentsia regarding the importance of democratization of knowledge. Doctor, social activist, and intellectual understood that medical knowledge should be common knowledge, since knowledge of this kind would help the masses better understanding the reality in which they lived. One example related to importance of maintaining personal cleanliness. In Polish society of that time, effort to publish popular scientific publication faced a crucial challenge: the relatively high rate of illiteracy among the population. Indeed, relatively high number of the common Jew did not read Polish nor Russian. However, in Jewish society, the number of illiterate people was trivial. Hence, the publication of Hebrew books by various doctors and social activists assured that the lack of knowledge in non-Jewish language such as Polish or Russian would not prevent the Jewish masses from learning what they need to know in order to maintain a healthy way of life. In the 1890s, members of the Jewish intelligentsia did not give up on the hope that the Jewish masses would improve their knowledge in those languages and soon would be able to fluently read Polish, Russian, and any other European language. However, in order to provide to the common Jewish people with knowledge that would expand their cultural horizon and assist them with improving their life, there was need to provide them reading material about science, literature, philosophy, and other issues tailored to their intellectual skills in Hebrew. Hence, those Hebrew publications did not necessarily indicate an inspiration to nurture the Hebrew language and literature. Rather, such publication indicate a pragmatic approach. And yet, it did not mean that those publications did not contribute significantly to the development of Hebrew literature. Rather, those Hebrew literary projects merged with the attempt to nurture the Hebrew language and literature, and even to move the boundaries of Hebrew literature, such as Ben Avigdor was interested in doing at the end of the 19th century in Warsaw. Some of the self-help medical publications were translated and adapted into Hebrew. Others were originally written in Hebrew. The book חיינו ואורח ימינו, עצות לשמור בריאות הגוף, היגיינה פופולרית, our life and legacy, how to stay healthy with hygiene, popular hygiene, edited by Israel Chaim Zagorski, a member of the Hatzfira editorial board, and Gershom Levin, a doctor and a social activist who was member of Yitzhak Leib Peretz Circle. Zagorski translated, edited, and combined 3 German books into Hebrew version, while Levin wrote the introduction, commentary, and explanation that he believed were essential for the Eastern European Hebrew reader. As they highlight in various prospects that announced the upcoming publishing of their books, Zagorski and Levin made special effort to write the book in simple language without complicated phrase and terminology. Similar tendency can be found in another book that was written by another prominent Jewish doctor, Israel Frankel, who was highly regarded in Warsaw medical circle and was one of the leading activists dedicated to improvement of the health of Warsaw Jewish residents. His book, Shomer HaBriut, Guarding Health, was a collection of articles previously published in Hatzfira columns, Sasonei Etz Chaim, Twig of the Tree of Life, and Yediot HaOlam VaTeva, News of the World and Nature, with some update supplement. Shomer Briut published more than once, what can indicate on the popularity of this publication among Hebrew readers. Several years later, Levin and Frankel published an additional book on those issues in Yiddish. They were not the only one who did so. After the status of Yiddish changed at the beginning of the 20th century, a number of Yiddish publications, including self-help medical guidebook, increased significantly. And about the Yiddish books, we can read the wonderful and relatively new book that Nati wrote and published. The Hebrew self-help medical books indicate the concern and urgent to help the common Jewish people. However, at the same time, the people who were behind those books include details and colorful description that were dedicated to the lifestyle of the Jewish masses, that articulated criticism and patronizing attitude. This did not mean that no trace of empathy to the Jewish masses or to the ways the social layers was connected to its root could be found in the books. However, this empathy was mixed with contempt and sense of condescension through the social layers. In this manner, those books articulated quite well the duality of the attitude of the Jewish intelligentsia to the masses. This duality of attitude also reflected their viewpoint about the proper balance that should be maintained between the elite and the masses. Member of the Jewish intelligentsia, like their peer in the non-Jewish surrounding, believed that it was their duty to provide the masses with appropriate reading material in simple language, without complicated phrases and terms on various issues. Like Ben Avigdor, several of them believed that they should take part in the attempt to create popular Jewish literature that would have artistic value. This did not mean, however, that those who took part in those efforts and other members of the Jewish intelligentsia had an interest in changing the balance between the masses and the elite. The various literary and other projects that members of the Jewish and non-Jewish intelligentsia promote did not reflect the desire on the part to turn the masses into elite. Rather, their goal, using the term suggested by the cultural historian Roman Ziman, was to turn the masses into intelligent mob. A social stratum that, because of its popular newspaper and popular literature that they read, know what happened in their lives, thanks to the education they acquire, which was not necessarily the same education that members of the intelligentsia acquire. Those people have decent cultural baggage and respectable income. The intelligent mob was the social layers that include the audience of illiterate craftsmen, merchants, and even workers, who regularly read newspaper and periodical, albeit not always to the same one as the intelligentsia. In the Polish society, the concern for meeting the cultural need of the masses can also be recognized from the rapidly increased number in Polish newspaper. Sorry. In 1870, there were 137 Polish newspapers in the world, while in 1890s, there were 225 Polish periodicals. In addition, popular and new area of publication in a wide range of topics were added to the book market of Warsaw. Between 1864 and 90s, 793 scientific books and 606 scientific articles were published in Warsaw, including popular scientific publications that were primarily aimed to the broad public, as were biography of Christian saints. In the last decade of the 19th century, various reading halls and libraries opened all around Warsaw and offer a sort of adult education program. Indeed, the number of illiterate people in Poland was still fairly high. However, in the late 19th century, the number began to change. All of those programs were aimed in supporting the mission, creating an educated, intelligent social classes of the masses. This represents a new way of thinking. For the first time, it was clear that cultural art and even press were not intended only for the high social layers. Rather, even people who had an elementary education could enjoy those areas. The inner Jewish discourse about the boundaries of Hebrew literature and the hierarchy that should exist between Hebrew and Yiddish literature was influenced by those developments. This was thus the background to the remark that Ben Avigdor wrote in his diary shortly before his arrival to Warsaw, that his own literary project integrated quite well with the other attempts that were being undertaken in Warsaw around that time to legitimize the culture of the masses. Indeed, it almost parallel attempt gain recognition of Yiddish as a legitimate language and not merely as a jargon, quite significantly challenged the attempt to create popular Hebrew literature. It can also raise a question to whether during the interwar period, the Bund and other Jewish political organizations were interested in creating a Jewish intelligent mob, or the leader who were engaged with those organizations interested in changing the balance between the elite and the masses. However, an attempt to answer those questions will have to wait to a future paper. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Thank you. Yeah. So before we move on, I want to admit I was trying to use this chat, and for some reason, maybe because I have two left hands, yeah, I can't answer. So we'll leave some time as much as possible for questions to all the three papers by the end, yeah, to organize it together. So our next speaker is Nathan Cohen, and his presentation is on popular Yiddish reading, Bibliotekn, for lay Yiddish readers. Yeah, Nati, please. Yeah.
Okay, now you can hear me. I'll just download my presentation. Just a sec. Okay. So thank you, Gennady. Thank you, Ella, very much for your most interesting paper. And soon you'll see how connected it is with mine. It's amazing sometimes. And I want to thank also Eugenia for the initiative for this. I can also already see the most interesting panel. So thank you, all of you, and of course the organizers of the conference. One of the first objects in the Western world aimed at exposing the unlearned public to high-quality literature was initiated in France in the mid-17th century. it was a multi-volume series of books or booklets entitled Bibliotek Blue. This idea spread over the years in Central and Eastern Europe, also reaching the Jewish reading public. In Russia, such libraries became popular beginning in the 1880s and were significantly popular in Congress Poland, where by the year 1918, no less than 150 different biblioteki were published. These series were created to fill in a significant gap between the common reading materials that of the masses, so to say, as we heard before, that was usually described as seductive and even dangerous, and those of the social elite. Being aware of the importance of educating and enlightening the common people, intellectuals on both sides of the continent initiated the publication and dissemination of those series that included literary works as well as non-fiction or popular scientific works in a uniformed shape and size. They were branded with attractive titles that would be easily recognized. Some of these publications also had national, social, and cultural goals and exposed the readers to current public discourses. Regarding the Jewish society, I will not discuss here Sholem Aleichem's and Peretz Bibliotekn, which didn't really match the concept of the popular series. Rather, I attempted to start with Ben Avigdor, but Ella did the work for me, and I'll just mention Ben Avigdor's Sifrei Agora, penny books, as an unprecedented initiative in 1891. And which had an influence on the Yiddish book market of that time. One of the contributors to the series was a young author from Vilna, Yitzchok Goido, who became later known as Beis Gorin. Motivated by the success of Ben Avigdor's penny books, Goido returned to Vilna and initiated a similar project, but in Yiddish, in 1893. Bibliotek Kleine Erzählungen, the library of small stories that contained 5 booklets with clear socialist messages. At the same time and place, the Yiddischer Jargonischer Komitee, the Committee for the Advancement of Yiddish Culture, was established, aimed at giving the Yiddish language and culture the appropriate and respectable place among other languages and cultures. The committee cooperated with the Yiddish activists and publishers Avrom Kotik and Alter Bressler in Warsaw and launched a new series, Wissenschaftliche Volksbücher, scientific popular books, as you can see here. These books or booklets were edited in Vilna and printed in Warsaw and were mainly devoted to popular scientific works that were translated or adapted from foreign languages, usually Russian. Through the 3 years of its existence, the Jargonischer Komitee, it's 1894-1896, published 6 booklets in this series. One of them, here on the screen, Adam's Generations, the Prehistory of Mankind. In 1900, the Jewish musician from Vilna, Yitzchok Pirozhnikov, established a publishing house. He published a series, Pirozhnikov's Library of Famous Stories, in small and elegant volumes, as he presented it, of 12 stories translated into Yiddish from Russian, Polish, German, French, English, Italian, and Swedish. Between 1898 and 1900, Lazar Zuckerman from Warsaw published Zuckerman's Volksbibliothek, consisting of 4 booklets or adaptations from foreign languages, and another series of 6 booklets devoted to health and hygiene under the title Seid gesund, as you see here. In St. Petersburg, we find then Die Neue Bibliothek, 1903, and in Odessa, a Bessarabian Yiddish author, Lazer David Rosenthal, established the Ariel Publishing Company and its Bibliothek dos Leben, with 20 booklets of Yiddish Bessarabian writers as well as translations from Russian. It should be noted that at the turn of the 20th century, there was a vibrant book market of suspenseful and fascinating, inexpensive booklets in Yiddish, in tens and occasionally in hundreds of installments. They were read mainly as a means of entertainment or as an escape from everyday hardships. From 1903 and onward, Yiddish daily newspapers also tried to attract these readers and to provide an inexpensive means for passing their limited free time. Contemporary Bibliotekn targeted these readership as well, but did not gain many readers and had to struggle for its existence. Nevertheless, this situation didn't cause any halt in their appearance. After gaining some experience in Chicago, Yankev Litsky settled in Warsaw in 1900 and opened the first modern Yiddish publishing company in the city, bearing the pretentious name Progress. In 1904, he launched his Kleine Volksbibliothek in order to, quote, give the Jewish masses inexpensive and useful books of European and Jewish literature, to refine their literary taste and enable them a higher level of education, end of quote. A few years later, Litsky initiated another series of the same character called Europäische Literatur, with Avrom Reisen as its editor. Another modern Yiddish publishing house that functioned in Warsaw in the first decade of the 20th century was that of Binyamin Shimin. His first project, 1907, was Universal Bibliothek, and 2 years later, he initiated a new project, Shimin's Große Weltbibliothek, Shimin's Great World Library, of contemporary world and Jewish literature. Every other week during its 3 years of existence, a new publication was added to the series, 66 booklets altogether. A small Warsaw publishing house called Allgemeine Bibliothek managed to publish during 1907 no less than 24 booklets, most of them translations from Russian. Especially significant in this project was a Polish-Russian Yiddish dictionary that was distributed in weekly installments. Magnus Krinsky, a well-known educator and editor in Warsaw, established a Hebrew publishing house called Haor, with a Yiddish branch, Bicher Farale. It seems that this initiative lasted longer than all other Bibliotekn of that time. During the first year of its existence, 1905, more than 40 booklets were published and tens of others in the following years. From 1908, Bicher Farale also published books. Publishing enterprises with ideological or political worldviews had theoretically better chances to survive. In Odessa, a Zionist activist, Dr. Yosef Sapir, established a publishing house called Zionistische Kopike Bibliothek. Until the outbreak of World War I, it published 37 works that were distributed in between 7,000 and 35,000 copies each. These were mainly thin brochures with description of the life in the land of Israel, episodes from Jewish history, and current Zionist ideology and theory. The Zionist movement won strength and influence in the newly established Polish state. It was reflected in numerous Hebrew publications as well as Yiddish publications, but these turned out to be only a minor success. Prior to World War I, socialist series were published simultaneously in Vilna and in St. Petersburg. The contents combined bell letters, mainly translated, together with economic and social theory and criticism. In the interwar period, the scope of socialist series grew significantly. Between the years 1927 and 1936, the Bund and its youth movement Zukunft published in Warsaw irregularly the Sozialistische Jugendbibliothek, which are required for our youth, as they expressed it. They contained a socialist ideology and biographies of leading figures. In 1938, also the Bund's children movement, SCIF, had its series SCIF's Bibliothek. Two unsuccessful attempts to publish Bibliotekn by the leftist cultural organization Kulturliga were followed by the Schulbibliothek, that published between 1921 and 1927 tens of thin booklets, many of them illustrated. They included selected stories of the best Yiddish writers as well as translated books, including Bialik. From the various socialist series, it's quite clear that most of them were directed at the younger generation, i.e., the forthcoming leadership of the movement and those who will bring forward the realization of the socialist ideology. In the interwar period, also Orthodox political circles contributed their share to the popular Yiddish publications. The Zionist Orthodox educational system, Yavne, had its Volksbibliothek Yavne, 1938-1939, with at least 12 booklets devoted to Jewish holidays and traditional themes. The Beis Yankov educational system published its Kinderbibliothek in 1929, followed by Unser Bibliothek für Kinder und Jugend in 1931 and 32. Here it is, in which few of the booklets were authored by Sarah Schenirer. These and other mentioned publications were distributed in the various movements' school networks and youth movements. As the awareness of the importance of Yiddish literature for children grew at the end of the first decade of the 20th century, not from the political point of view now, publishers and editors began also to address this audience by publishing texts in various shapes and genres. Close to the outbreak of the First World War, and simultaneously with the appearance of the first Yiddish children's journal, Grinike Beimelech, by Boris Kletskin in Vilna, he also introduced a children's series called Kinderbibliothek. But due to the outbreak of the war, only 3 booklets appeared. Shloime Bastomsky, the editor of Grinike Beimelech, owned a publishing house specially founded for promoting children's literature. It published between 1921 and 1939, with some long breaks, a series called Bibliotek Grinike Beimelech, with original and translated stories, folk tales, songs, and plays. Another Vilna publisher, Shloimo Shrebrek, initiated close to the outbreak of the war his Kinderbibliothek, that was also interrupted by the war, but was renewed shortly afterward. Here we can see also in Lodz a series for children, which I'll skip. In Warsaw, a group of Yiddish teachers headed by the educator Moishe Teichmann, founded in 1936 a publishing house, Kinderfeind, with a journal bearing the same title. Motivated by the idea of contributing new content to the developing Yiddish literature for children, this publishing house launched 3 series: Bibliotek Aleph for children and youth, and Bibliotek Beis for toddlers, with 49 booklets in each one of them, and 8 issues of Musikalische Bibliothek. Yiddish publishers in the interwar period continued to publish various series to both distribute high-quality literature for the masses, for the reading public, and to ensure their income. One of these publishers was Shimon Yachkovsky. He founded in 1923 a publishing company bearing his name and succeeded in publishing between the years 1929 and 1931 some 10 booklets of Yachkovsky Bibliotek, Yachkovsky's Bibliotek, as we see here. In his business, Yachkovsky employed 2 well-qualified translators, Shloime Sheinberg and Mark Rakowski. While in the 1920s, translated books comprised approximately 1/3 of the books published in Yiddish, at least in Poland, in the late 1930s, the part declined to about 10% only. A significant part of these translations were included in 2 Yiddishist projects. One was Universal Bibliothek, as you see here, under the management of the above-mentioned Shloime Sheinberg, with 40 translated books published by mid-1938 and in over 100,000 copies altogether. The other project was Bibliotek Mark Rakowski, with some 30 translated books between the mid-1920s and the mid-1930s. Daily newspapers also contributed their share to the literary series. Simultaneously with the appearance of a new popular Yiddish daily newspaper, Yiddisches Tagblatt or the Tageblatt, in Warsaw in May 1906, its editor and publisher, the famous Shmuel Yaakov Yatzkan, initiated a series attached to the newspaper, Hoy's Bibliotek, of 50 booklets. Most of them presented items in popular science and history, and a small selection of bell letters and current affairs. Following the success of his first newspaper, Yatzkan established another one, the well-known Warsaw Hind, 1908. During the first years of its existence, Yatzkan published alongside the Hind another series, Familienbibliothek, here it is, of 150 issues. Most of them were bell letters, about half of them Sholem Aleichem's works, for which he didn't get any payment, and the rest popular science and history. The issues were either distributed to the newspaper's subscribers or sold separately. Despite a crisis in the Yiddish book market from the beginning of the 1930s, cultural institutions and literary journals initiated various enterprises to encourage the purchasing of Yiddish books, but with only limited success. An outstanding project in those years was the Groschen Bibliothek, initiated by the same newspaper, by the Hind, but as a cooperative then. It was a mass production of 64-page booklets with attractive titles and fluent language that were disseminated in thousands of copies. Between 1931 and 1937, 275 numbered booklets were published. No doubt that this was the most successful series published in interwar Poland. To summarize, In studying Yiddish popular publishing activity in Eastern Europe or in Eastern Europe and in independent Poland, one can follow the editors' and publishers' interest in the reader's literary taste and their ability to challenge political, social, and cultural values of the modernizing world. Basically, two central considerations were taken into account in deciding what to publish. One is the ideological or artistic aspect, and the other is the commercial. Quite often, those considerations were combined, and usually there was an inverse relationship between the quality of the literature published and the income expected. Therefore, despite the original objective of the Bibliotekn, the survival of those publishers who tried to push high quality literature was more challenging than that of their colleagues who published romantic tales, Hasidic hagiography, or fantastic novels. Publishing Bibliotekn could be considered less risky in the short term, but more obligating from the consumer's point of view in the long term. Therefore, the number of Yiddish series was relatively high, both pre and post World War I, but only those publishers who had the financial ability could maintain and develop these series. Thank you very much, and I hope that I didn't took too much time.
Perfect, nice. It's absolutely yes. The timing and everything is excellent. The papers. So our third presentation is Eugenia Prokop-Janiec's paper, Interwar Polish Jewish Novels in Installments as a Medium of Memory and History. Yes, Eugenia, it's yours.
Yes, may I ask for helping me?
Yes,
okay, thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much, Gennady. I would like to start with expressing my gratitude for my great co-panelists, Ella and Nati, who are so generous and are ready to accept the idea of speaking about multilingual popular Jewish culture, and who have elaborated this idea so beautifully in their presentations. Among almost 30 novels in installments published in the Piąta Rano Polish Jewish sensationalist daily issued in the period 1931-1939, at least a quarter refer to the events that form a bloody opening of the 20th century in the Eastern Europe, the Great War, the Bolshevik Revolution, as well as Polish-Russian and Polish-Ukrainian combats of 1919 and 1920. In advertisements and comments published in the press, the works are defined as novels based on true stories, a masterpiece reflection of contemporary era, and are recommended to readers as, I quote, historical documents from recent years based on true events, revealing the struggle of people thrown into the war. Another quotation, all history of the Jewish people in Poland, from the torments under the whip of Cossacks and Russian police through the persecution by German invaders until present, will be reflected in the novel, unquote. And Piąta Rano advertised Szymon Wysocki novel, The Bloody Days. Here another comment on this novel published in the columns of Piąta Rano. The Polish Jewish serialized novel is a modern literary form being an effect of transculturation mechanisms. It relies on cultural adaptation of universal literary topoi, character types, narrative schemes, and a collage of artistic European and Jewish patterns. Novels published in Piąta Rano are of multi-genre nature. They combine elements of wartime novel, spy thriller, romance novel, novel of manners, adventure novel. The prevailing genre, however, is the social melodrama in its historical variation. It is such a combination of narrative structures of melodrama with analysis of historical events that finally results in affirmation of traditional social values and moral order. Transformation of chaos into order, victory of good over evil, awarding the righteous and punishing the criminals, triumph of justice confirm the conventional moral or philosophical principle as the inherent basis of cosmic order. Characteristics exposed in the editor's comments, speaking of true events, records of individual and collective historical experience, documenting the past, point to special cognitive function of serialized novels. Text published in the dailies with wide circulation are thus related to the area of, let me refer to the well-known categorization by Hyde and White, the historical prose. It means narratives undertaking the effort of showing past events, gave meaning to the past, and led to understanding of historical events. The editor's position contains a motif that is intriguingly close to the perspective developed by contemporary anthropology, sociology, cultural studies, as well as film studies and literary studies. These disciplines nowadays depart from negative evaluation of popular culture in opposition to the elite culture and treat both areas as equally valid spheres of human activity and symbolic practices. The focus is on its relations with the everyday life and the local, particularly on the importance of daily life practices and local forms of knowledge. By considering popular culture to have a positive and cognitively active role, it is given the function of a cognitive tool, a map enabling its users to find their way in the world, and a toolkit that they use in their everyday lives. According to this perspective, the domain of popular culture is regarded as a diversified domain with many local, national, and social variants. Moreover, there are close relationship between popular culture and modernity, development of the modern individual, and codes of national identities. In my paper, I wish to consider the functioning of Indo-Polish Jewish popular novel as a medium for history and memory, as well as the form of historical prose and expression of social values. For this purpose, I select two texts published in Piąta Rano, the novels Pogrom and the Bloody Days, signed by Wysocki, at the moment, I don't know whether it is real name or pen name. In both novels, here the installments of them, in both references to recent historical events are particularly extensive. Pogrom presents the participation of Jewish soldiers in the battles of World War I, the wartime wave of anti-Jewish violence and pogroms in Ukraine, as well as what happened to the refugees after the war. The novel The Blood Days, in turn, provides a description of damage affecting Jewish Tetlach in the Congress Poland, persecutions of Jewish civilians by all fighting parties, as well as the fate of refugees and the deported who sought shelter in big cities and evacuated deep into Russia. Both novels use the popular narrative scheme of innocence persecuted by evil. Both place the figure of a beautiful Jewish woman, a good daughter, a faithful wife, and dedicated mother, assaulted by enemies and tormented by misfortunes, at the heart of the narrative. They set her story in the space-time of war, revolution, and ethnic conflicts in Eastern Europe, with persecutors being predominantly the ethnic others, Ukrainians, Germans, Russians, strikingly not Poles. Both end with ethically clear closures. The ones who suffer are awarded, whereas Jewish families scattered and dispersed around the world become reunited. At the level of historical narrative that builds the understanding of the past, Vysotsky's novel used three characteristic templates. One of them is the classic model of lacrimal historiography. The novels expose and repeat the scenes of violence and persecutions, presenting the Jews as tormented victims. Here is excerpt from the novel with the image of massacre of Jewish men, women, children. In a pogrom, the domination of the model of martyrdom is additionally brought out by the confrontation of Jewish and Ukrainian visions of history. During the trial of a Jewish attacker who, in an act of revenge, killed a Ukrainian war criminal guilty of murdering Jews, the allusion to Płaskirów and to Sholem Schwarzbart, the case of Sholem Schwarzbart, are obvious. The hearing turns into a sort of confrontation between the two nations before the Tribunal of Europe. The speeches of the prosecutors and attorneys refer to national historical narratives. The symptomatic contrast, a story of heroic nation building, of building an independent Ukrainian state versus the story of suffering, quotation, slaughters, innocently spilled Jewish blood, story of a group that endured persecution since the Babylonian exile until the times of Tsarist regime, reveals different rules for constructing narratives supporting community identities. Another model reached for by Vysotsky involves modern way of thinking about history as a space of experience co-shared by the Jews and non-Jews. It is implemented through a structural device of contextualization of the events. After sketching a broader European non-Jewish perspective, the story focuses on Jewish matters and is told from the Jewish point of view. Descriptions of the system of political European forces, panoramic presentation of the fate of civilians in the Eastern Europe that is crossed with war fronts, analysis of experiences of soldiers attacking with bayonets in the fighting armies serve as an introduction to presenting the situation of the Jews as a group or their individual stories. Quotation that is built according to this model. Such a strategy makes the Jewish history and experience presented in continuous interaction with external European history. The rhythm of events at the heart of continental scene determines all peripheral rhythms, whereas the threads of European and Jewish history are intertwined with continuous oscillation between referring to broader historical processes and presenting their local Jewish repercussions. Another example of such a technique. The third model of narrative present in serialized novels is the traditional formula of typological equalization of historical events and presentation of contemporary events as repetition of former events. Joseph Yerushalmi points to this tendency to fit the recent catastrophe into the mold of past tragedies in the 17th century stories about the events in Ukraine during the Khmelnytsky uprising. This formula was also present in historical songs in Yiddish. In Wysocki's novel, the destruction of Jewish towns and the deportation of their inhabitants during the war are presented as another calamity of exile. Quotations. And calamity of exile and scattering. Outbreaks of anti-Jewish violence in Ukraine resemble the events from the 17th century, and the gangs of 20th century pogrom rioters are compared and identified with Haidamaks. Another quotation. The understanding of historical events through the method of projecting the knowledge about the past onto the present is what Hayden White calls using the practical past. This past is formed by information, beliefs, ideas, imaginations, experiences, memories, remembrance, while principally by rules and generalizations through which we perceive contemporary events. Due to the presence of ethical element and various problem-solving scenarios, the practical past allows orientation and decision-making both in regular daily life and in extreme situations, catastrophes, natural disasters, battles, and so on. In the novels Pogrom and the Bloody Days, the main tools of Jewish practical past prove to be the images of historical Jewish catastrophes, Hurban, temple demolition, and Gzeires Tag V'Tat, the cruel slaughters from the time of Khmelnytsky uprising, and their bloody repetition in the following century during the Haidamach times. They establish a Jewish space of experience that sets the horizon within which the understanding of history occurs. The perception of history through presence of permanent tablets therein is exposed in the comments that point to the similarity and repeatability of events, behaviors, and actions. These comments are visible. This rhythm of the comments is important in the narration. While referring to the practical past, serialized novels from the 1930s belong to Jewish literary forms oriented at remembrance. It appeals not to forget and the order of Zahor are addressed directly to the readers. A longer quotation, Troskurov, Płaskirów, the play of words, that challenge at the tragedy, will anyone forget your defeat and disgrace? Troskurov, do you remember those atrocities? If not, ask the trees that provide shelter to many refugees. They left behind comfortable beds and their wealth to hide among the trees on a branch from the bloodthirsty persecutors. If you do not remember such dreadful nights, ask the mute stones that serve as graves for hundreds of victims in the mass tombs laid to eternal sleep. Ask the mute stones will speak and the rocks will weep. Strikingly, the signs of witnesses are sought in the nature, landscape, and the space. A similar motif could be found in elegies commemorating the events from the mid-17th century with appeals, earth, do not cover their blood, an appeal to preserve and disclose the traces of a crime. The specificity of structures of historical narratives applied in the Polish Jewish serialized novel manifests expressly at the background of the Indo-Polish novel of this genre. Also here, I'm thinking about Polish novel, events related to the war, revolution, Polish Bolshevik and Polish-Ukrainian combats form the fundamental grounds for historical references as factors shaping the new Eastern Europe and the New Age and setting the borders between the eras of Polish life. They are, however, fitted, let me refer to analysis by Oskar Czarnik, into a different model of narrative organized about open political conflict and open struggle against the enemy. Passing to conclusions. Firstly, Polish Jewish serialized novel was treated and popularized in the 1930s as a form capable of recording the modern Jewish experience of history and providing tools for understanding it. Works introducing the motifs of war, revolution, and national conflicts can be read as a popular variety of historical prose and one of literary forms offering means for representation, explanation, and understanding of history, as well as a symbolic reaction to historical situation and a narrative approach to experiencing profound historical shock that the Jews of the Eastern Europe were exposed to. Secondly, popular serialized novel in Polish is a new Jewish literary form addressed to the new Jewish reader, talking about radical transformations in the modern Europe and emergence of its 20th century order, while presenting the history of Eastern European Jews as permanently linked to the rhythm of general history and codependent on them. It still assimilates the new events into the old and established conceptual structures. Stories starting from the ritual gesture of pointing to the end of the old world, some quotations from other novels written by Arthur Bregweis and Jerzy Klinger. They also point to the end of the old world and the beginning of the new one. All these novels referred to traditional cultural plots of persecutions and martyrdom of fundamental importance to the Jewish identity in the diaspora. And thirdly, as a genre of modern literature and a medium for building historical awareness, Polish Jewish popular prose fits into the phenomenon of vernacular modernism. It is my thesis. This phenomenon is often defined as a set of cultural forms placed in the daily life and common experience of individuals that represent modernity in its local manifestations while revealing their codependence of supra-local. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia. So we have three excellent presentations and excellently framed. You know, it is really, we have Hebrew, we have Yiddish, we have Polish, and everything in Warsaw or in Poland. I am in a sense in an enemy territory because I usually look at Poland and at Warsaw from the point of view of Kiev or best Vilna, and of course for them Warsaw it was always something, you know, it's commercial center, no, ideologically and culturally questionable and so on. But we have three excellent presentations and we still have some time. And I can see in the chat question from Natalia Alexion and Anthony Polonsky, and I can add my question. The question that I suggest to all presenters is readers. Who are the readers? And what kind? How can you give an average, of course, very average profile of a reader, gender, age, religious, secular, what kind of a social position, something, you know? It is, of course, it is always it is such an approximation, but still, I am sure that you have such an approximation before your eyes. So maybe Ella, you'll be the first, yes, for the Hebrew reader, yes?
Yes, the Hebrew reader, and I will refer to Natalia's question as well.
Yes.
So first of all, we do know that definitely in the 19th century, as regarded this, in addition to the hierarchy that was between Yiddish and Hebrew, there is also kind of there is also strongly the gender is very, very crucial here. We do know that until for relative long of time, Yiddish, which was the jargon already, was known mostly as the language of the woman, while Hebrew was the language of the man. And we do know another thing, that the Hebrew periodical, while we're talking about daily daily newspaper and the magazine, was considered to be a very, very manhood arena. Most of the writers were men, and definitely most of the reader were were men. However, when we talk about the medical guidebook, we can see from some of the text were refer to women as well. They were talking about, for instance, the importance of maintaining the house clean and everything, or definitely when we're talking about how to take care of the children and everything. So they took into consideration that also women read it, or men were the reader, the husband, but they informed the woman, the wife about it. Another thing that we think we need to take into consideration, that definitely in the 19th century, and it's something related to what I think the reader were young. We're talking about the young generation. The one that, mostly of them, the one that hide, that sat in the Shtibelach and the Beit Midrash with the big Talmud book, and behind the Talmud book hide the different Hebrew book, that some of them were not considered to be as appropriated reading material. And another thing that I want to say to something that Natalia had about, I mean, yes, the song, the popular culture was definitely a culture that was definitely the song and everything were also the song of the woman who sang. And yes, the men were the one who began this research. However, we do know that as regard to folklore or popular culture, we have Regina Lilienthal, who contribute a very, very important contribution to the study of folklore and popular culture. So the fact that women, produce, if I can say produce, a popular culture and men will study are not necessarily clear dichotomy.
Thank you. Yes, Nati, now we move to Yiddish, yes?
Yeah, we'll move to Yiddish. So there is a division in the Yiddish publications, I think a quite clear division between the political publications and the commercial publications. The political publications were distributed free of charge. They were distributed to workers, to school pupils. The first ones, those of Yitzchok Goido and the Jargonischer Komitet, they had to the initiators had to pay for the printing a very basic price, because also the co-workers in Warsaw, Kotik and Bresler, had the same initiative to distribute as many publications, no matter who will pay for it and who will not pay for it. The commercial ones were and later on also in the interwar period in schools and youth movements, of course. The commercial initiatives were more problematic, because they hoped that the publishers hoped that since the booklets are so cheap, people will not calculate so much about the purchasing and just give the few groschen and buy it. But the consumers didn't do that. Sometimes they bought 1, 2, 3, but they didn't buy the whole, or they didn't subscribe the whole series. That's why the series were so shortly published. I don't know. I see Anthony's question here about if there were in libraries. I'm not so sure that there were in libraries. I found hardly here and there some very few issues of the whole series. One number, two numbers that I think came just by occasionally arrived into the libraries, maybe to the National Library in Jerusalem. They were sent more systematically, maybe. I cannot see any clear division between male readers and female readers, although in the interwar period, of course, maybe in the 19th century, Yiddish was more attractive or addressed to female readers. Maybe I'm not so sure about the end of the 19th century, but in the interwar period, obviously females, reading women prefer to read Polish and less Yiddish. So I can guess, I think, that most readers of the series were younger people, maybe male readers more than female, but it's only a guess, a speculation.
I have now young readers, men and women in my doctoral class who read a pamphlet from the Goshen Bibliotek.
Oh, that's
So
good. That's
never
nice. Very
I need
nice.
them to read it.
Finally.
Finally, we have it. Washer Perelman's his trip to Bibliotekn. Yes.
Wow,
Okay.
wow.
Yeah.
This is a marvelous collection, which, by the way, was distributed free of charge to the subscribers of the newspaper.
Yeah. Thank you, Eugenia. So now we're moving to Polish. Yes, so linguistically.
Yes. It is significant that Polish Jewish popular novel, this genre novel in installment, serialized novel, originated in the 1930s when the wave of linguistic Polonization was visible. Nati has described this dynamics of linguistic Polonization of Jews in Poland, and 30s, it was the decade of massive linguistic Polonization. So it was the time when the new Jewish readers also appeared on the market, we can say. The readers who were ready to read in Polish on the one hand, but on the other hand, they wanted to read about something specifically Jewish. So I think that this cultural and national profile was very interesting. They were ready to read in Polish, but about the Jewish topics. And it is the situation in which this kind of popular Polish Jewish serialized novels originated. We can say something more about the readers, analyzing letters to the publishers of this popular dailies. Piąta Rano used to publish letters of readers and comment these letters as well. And we can say at the moment that the readers represented different generations, different milieus, men, women, young, older, from big cities, from smaller cities as well. This type of novel offered I'm thinking about these novels with historical motifs, often understanding, explanation, interpretation of the modern experience of modern history. So I think that maybe it was the genre much more appealing to the older readers, not to the young readers, but to the older readers who experienced the war, revolution, and so on and so on.
Thank you, Eugenia. So we will have just 4 minutes left, yeah, and there are some additional questions. Maybe if we can react shortly. So there is a question. I saw your thinking, not you, your reply. Also, there's a question about to Eugenia. Whether there were 2 questions actually. One question whether it was really that there was an attempt to avoid, accusing Polish people in atrocities, yes, and
Yes.
if there was something about atrocities or violence during World War One.
Yes, it was striking for me that in these novels, in these 2 novels, among the perpetrators were Germans, were Ukrainians, Russians, but not Poles. I don't know why at the moment. Maybe it was the question of thinking about Polish readers as well, who may read these novels, but I'm not sure. But it is striking for me that rather Ukrainians, rather Germans, not Poles, are among perpetrators. And I have read the question about description of pogroms and violence. Yes, especially the novel Pogrom is the novel with long descriptions of atrocities I have presented some excerpts from this novel, but there are many scenes of executing people by the military troops. People were shot, hanged, women were raped. So the descriptions of all atrocities and this naked violence were very intensive in these novels.
Thank you so much. I believe it was excellent. And of course, if we have an additional hour, I'm pretty sure that it would have been easy to fill it with questions, discussions, and comments. But in any case, yes. So all best wishes, and thank you for active participation. We have quite a few people who attended this panel, yes, international, virtual, and so on.